Hey everybody, Lone Outlander back with you with Project Arroyo's dialogue mapping tutorials. I wanted to make something that was a little bit more comprehensive this go round. So I took some notes on my previous videos and I tried to consolidate them into something that I thought would be a little bit more cohesive and would definitely be able to give you a much clearer idea of the steps of the process rather than trying to follow kind of the stream of consciousness way I was doing it before. So we've got a table of contents here. Obviously from the video, you guys won't be able to click this link. Once I get this thing refined a little bit further, then you'll be able to click on these links to be able to jump to different sections. So with part one, we'll go to the introduction, so forth, so on and so forth. So here's how we get started. The first thing you're going to need is the SVOL script editor. Now the version we're currently using is 4.1.7 release candidate 1 or RC1. No More Mutants, which is a site that for some reason tends to throw up some alerts depending on what type of antivirus you have. Just be aware that I'm not sure why it does this. I don't know if it's the ad serve or whatever else, but if you have trouble pulling it, I can probably zip it and just send it to you. It's only, I think, 5 or 6 megs. Notepad++, this is my preferred text editor. Other editors will, of course, work. So if you use, like Maven or Sublime Text or things like that, is perfectly fine. But the predefined UDL that I made, which is basically just a very simplified XML document to provide some formatting, is going to be derived from Notepad++. That's going to be the way we're going to be able to implement it from Trello. Free playing, we've got version 1.9.3. That is the current one we've got going on. There's a link to the SourceForge there. Again, links aren't going to be active on what you guys can currently access, but it will be available to you later on. So let's look at some source material stuff. There's really only 2 pieces of information you're going to need to get started for this. You can either use the unpacked message dialog files from Fallout 2. You can either pull them from, I think there's a zip that we've got floating around on the server. You can unpack them directly from the Interplay archive system, or you can pull them from the Fallout wiki, but I would not recommend doing that because the .message file does not save correctly. The formatting gets all messed up, and if you copy and paste it, there's going to be some jank in your work, unfortunately. Then you're also going to need the SSL scripts from f2scripts.7z or .zip. This is a zipped up package that we have that has all of the SSL script files already compiled and commented from their original days at Interplay. So instead of taking the INT files and breaking out the SSL from that, it's our recommendation that you just start from the commented SSL files that are already there. So this is an MSG file. I took a screen cap of Rebecca's message file from the Den. It's a simple text file that contains dialogue for the character indicated in the file name. There's no real markup involved, but the UDL file that I talked about just a second ago in Notepad++ applies some markup just to be able to format based on the contents of the text and make things a little bit easier to read. But as you can see here, nothing crazy going on. You've got, a hashtag to start, usually a node identifier, maybe a descriptor or 2, and then you've got these 3 bracketed sections. The first one's going to be the line of dialogue. Next one's going to be blank. I've not seen any that have anything in that, so I do not know what that is yet, but I'm sure we'll find out. And then, of course, there is the text of the message line. So our basic process of mapping is this. We're going to take the SSL, and we're going to use that as a reference for the code that makes the dialogue sequence function. So that means that we're going to look at the sequential steps of execution that would cause the dialogue to be displayed in the console or pop up on screen if we have, floats or things like that that pop up near the cursor. The SSL refers to lines of dialogue stored in the MSG file. Now, these MSG files will sometimes be referred to by name. Sometimes they'll be referred to by number. Now, whichever one you have, there are ways to find the correspondences that'll list up. Once you've got your match between your SSL and your MSG, we can then go ahead and use these 2 documents to annotate the MSG file to create a more solid framework on which we can build a mind map. Now, for those of you who haven't heard the term before, mind map is a graphical, flow-based representation of each step of NPC implementation with both files. Once we've got that done, we're going to save this as a .mm file, which is the standard file for FreePlane. And then we will export it to PDF using FreePlane for cross-platform reference on mobile and desktop devices. PDF is just an easily deliverable, easily compressed format that we can use on tablets, laptops, desktops, and phones, so we can keep track of stuff on the go. So let's get into some reference materials and resources to figure out some things that we can use to aid our dialogue mapping and try and figure out some of the context behind some of the text that we're going to run into. So first thing that comes up is the Fallout Wiki. This, of course, is the merger of Nukipedia and the Vault. So if you've been familiar with either of those two websites previous, then of course you will be familiar with the combined source now. So rather than having two sources that are kind of contradicting one another or just repeating things, now they've merged. The wiki is great for a lot of stuff. If we have dialogue that seems out of place or that seems like it has unusual conditions to be able to trigger it, or if there's things that have been duplicated, then the wiki can help us to kind of clear that up, in most cases. We can also find correspondence between NPC behavior and dialogue. Another thing is that because we're trying to restore some of the cut content, stuff like San Francisco and the EPA, we want to make sure that we're following the known lore based on things like the Fallout Bible, written by Chris Avallone, looking at resources that come from other games, things that have been referenced in context that are considered canon, even stuff that's not entirely considered canon, like Van Buren. The wiki also provides us some quick reference for things like special and skill stats. This is good to know. For example, the character Joey in the Den. There are a couple of checks that involve seeing whether or not the player's strength is greater than that of Joey. So being able to do a quick check on that is handy. I will show you later on how I incorporate some of that into the comments so that I have the reference built into my .msg file, so I know exactly what the strength comparisons would be, or the charisma, or whatever the skill check may be. The wiki is good for big picture items. That's the big pull that I want you guys to see from this. The wiki is not really for code level concerns. Now, I will say that with an asterisk, if you will. For something like the supercomputer error in the first Fallout, where you can challenge Zax to a chess game you're supposed to be able to win, that is something that they actually talk about that is code level. They talk about how the skill check, the script they're in, is actually bugged. So in cases where we may run into something like that in Fallout 2, that would probably end up on the wiki because it generates a certain amount of discussion and interest. All that being said, as wonderful as the wiki is, it is not a canonical content source because anyone and everyone can log in and make edits. So if somebody wants to put their own in-universe original character, it gets into some Sonic the Hedgehog fan fiction stuff really quick. Now, thankfully, Fallout Wiki is not badly moderated, so that means that a lot of that stuff gets caught early on, and it gets to be blanked out, so we don't get overloaded with that stuff. And most people know that the majority of things for Fallout 2, at least in current parlance, has been discovered. So it's not like there's going to be an influx of massive amounts of new material. Now, if somebody goes back and they take some stuff from the IMDb page and they make some pages for, this person did the voice of Sulik, this person did the voice of Greg Eagles, by the way, of Sergeant Dornan, or all that kind of stuff. So it's important to understand how these representations may exist on the wiki and the likelihood that we're not going to see a lot of new stuff, but we may. But it's not the big changes that get you. It's the little stuff. So we want to make sure that we're using the wiki as a, I guess, not necessarily confirmation, but a little bit of confirmation bias, something to assuage our concerns that we may be taking a misstep. When in doubt, the int file, which is the non-decompiled script, the SSL, and the .message file are considered the arbiters of inclusion or exclusion in terms of content. Now, there are some variations here. Of course, if you talk to Austin, he may have an idea or two about something that we could theoretically change that would still be canon. Of course, we've got our lore team, trying to make sure we can expand all this stuff, because the world of Fallout 2 is much more explorable in the creation engine than it ever was in the engine in which it was originally produced. So that's something to remember. Reference materials. Okay, so one of the big ones that comes up first is commands.doc. Now, commands.doc was originally written in Word 95. So it wasn't great in terms of trying to bring the formatting over. There was lots of stuff that was a little bit scrambled looking. It wasn't a great use of space. Some of the stuff was hard to read. So I went in, cleaned it up, and reformatted things a little bit. And I kept all the original information. I just wanted to make it simpler to understand what it was trying to tell you. So I didn't want to have the same name. I went ahead and changed it to script commands and naming conventions, because that's much more accurate to what it contains. And I do want to shout out Jeremy Barnes and Jesse Reynolds for their work on the original document. In commands.doc's update, you'll see that there's actually a link to their Fallout wiki pages, and I believe each of those have links to their social media. So, if you want to hit them up and tell them, hey man, we really appreciate the work and we're trying to stay faithful, it's always good to know something that you did that matters. I mean, imagine something that you did 25 years ago, and for some of us, older guys, that's a little bit easier than some of you youthful ones, and they tell you, dude, this really had an impact on me, or I'm working on trying to revive this for a new era. That's so cool, right? So commands.doc does the same thing that script commands does, and explains all of the functions and parameters of methods from the original documentation. Everything that I could find to try and explain how these things worked, I went ahead and included. Also included is a list of script actions, so the various ways in which the different scripts play out, the directory structure, how things are organized inside of the F2 content layout for scripts and for dialogue and all that stuff. And then, of course, naming styles. So how we can decipher how scripts are named, how variables should be named, and how the defines work in the global.h and things like that. Now let's get into our next section of tips and tricks, which is the SFAL script editor. SFAL is a really useful tool that's still being maintained a little bit. I think the last release was either earlier in June or maybe in May, but it is still being worked on a little bit. So if you go to Phobos 2077's GitHub, you can actually pull the original source code. Now it is in Visual Studio format, so it would need to be compiled. You'd actually have to compile the project, but the version 4171 or whatever the release candidate one is that we have listed earlier, already has the GUI, has everything organized, and it's not big. So if we see any major changes come to that, then obviously I'll let you guys know. Part of the thing that SFAL does that's really handy is that if for whatever reason you do not have an SSL for a particular character, you can actually do so by using the decompiler to pull from the int. Now, because we have annotated SSL files for pretty much everything else, we don't really need it, but if for whatever reason that one's corrupted or just won't load, that's good. Now, there are situations in which a decomped SSL can help us. If the annotated script has a lot of generic names, or is a little bit too informal, or it's a little bit too obscure, maybe it's just difficult to figure out what the variable names mean, too much abbreviation, things like that, we can be more rigorous with our code checking and try and figure out exactly what's being executed. So, two things that I want you guys to be aware of is include statements and variables. The include statements at the beginning of the SSL are links to files called headers. Now, these headers allow us to expand the referential scope of the MPC scripts. So things like global.h, define.h, I'll talk about those more in just a second. These are going to include variables that we will see across multiple NPCs, across multiple spatial effects, things like that. They'll be seen in a lot of places. And because of that, early forms of modularity basically said, okay, just use the statement include in order to allow us to reference those particular file locations. Another thing we want to talk about is variables. Now, most people know of a variable as like, x equal 5, or int x equal 5 if you want to declare type in the beginning. What we have here that I want to pay attention to are LVAR and MVAR. LVAR is an abbreviation for local variable, and this is where we have declared variables that will track changes to the NPC based on gameplay, meaning that as the variable script for, you know, for Cassidy or for Goris or any of our different NPCs goes about, there are things that will change. Now, obviously in Fallout 4 we track those a little bit differently, but it's the same concept. We're going to go ahead and have this little, this little tick mark box on the back of our character that says this has happened that affects whatever. It's kind of like saying Nick Valentine will remember that, or they loved this, or they hated that. Map variables are a little bit different. This is going to track changes of interactions between NPCs and their location. So to find correspondence, for instance, somebody like Joey in the den, or Vic, or Mom, or Metzger in the den, they would all have their own map variables related to the den. So if we go into, I think it's den.h, we might be able to find some mvars attached to them, or den, BUS, or BUS1 for the business sections of the den. Those are going to allow us to say, where a particular home tile is, or who belongs where when things spawn. So it's going to be more so about the location rather than the individual. So the most common shared files that we need are going to be in the headers folder. So, one like critterpid.h. This is going to contain defines, which are basically pre-processed definitions for all critter prototypes. So critters are just living things. So if we talk about, creatures being, or critters being the dude, which is the player, talk about that in a minute, NPCs, or mobs, monsters, combatants, if you will, those are considered critters. This is going to be prepended. Any variable defined in here is going to be prepended with PID underscore. Same thing in item PID. This is going to list prototype IDs for items. So PID underscore, fuel cell converter, or whatever it is, something that you have to retrieve for Smitty to upgrade the Highwayman, is going to be defined in item PID.h. And essentially what's going to happen is you'll have a method that will add or remove something from your inventory, and it'll refer to the PID. The reason this is important is that if you have a PID established, you have a standard numerical ID. It kind of ties back to what you think about for databases, and what you have is in a database is called a primary key. This means that you can change the values inside the table, if you will, excuse me, but you'll always be able to refer back to the same item because the primary key does not change. Kind of like somebody having a driver's license. Your driver's license number doesn't change, but if you, get taller, you get your license at 16, you're probably still growing, and then your birth date, that's going to stay the same, but you will get older, reference to that. Your address may change, that sort of thing, but the license number still stays with you, And then we get to global.h. This is for all global variables. It's prepended with gvar underscore. So when you see gvar in the code, that is a global variable, meaning that it can be changed and it is affected at the world space level of the game. Meaning that, if you're a slaver or a child killer, or if a particular NPC has died, that will be set at the global level because it's not local to a particular map. It's not local to just one character. It is a global change. And then, of course, we have define.h, which gives us all of our pre-processing items. Let me enunciate. Things like stats, skills, traits, and perks. So these are all items like, if you're an outdoorsman, or if you, what's the one if you're charming, if you enhance barter, things like that. Conversationalist, I think that might be it. Now, gvar sorted.h, is one that I did custom. Basically, I just cut and pasted into Excel, sorted it by its numerical content, so that way it would be easy for me to jump up and down the list. If you look at global.h, they're not sorted numerically. They're sorted by content, so they're kind of chunked together, but they're not completely in numerical order. So this one just goes, 441 is going to follow 440. You don't have to jump around and guess where it is. So something that's important to note about SVOL is that it's a standard programming compiler in that there are keywords that define the block structure, which are called method blocks. So in this case, we have procedures, abbreviated often as proc. So each proc has a begin and end keyword to define the boundaries beyond declaration. So where we say procedure, then we see the name, and then we have begin, and then we have the content, and then we get to end. So on the right-hand side here, we see DC Derek. For example, procedure, start, begin, end. There's nothing in there. That's what we call a null procedure or a null method. It doesn't do anything, but it does have to be there in case it gets called. SVOL allows non-commented procs to be folded to compress the length of the document as read. So if you look at the declaration region at line 5, you'll see that the line indicator on the left immediately jumps to 67. So that means lines 5 through 66 involve materials as we would see similar to 71 to 82 in proc timed event pproc. Okay, so folding is a technique I'll talk to you about a little bit later. You know, for major characters like First Citizen Lynette or Sulik, you know, any of your companions definitely. You know, some of the bigger characters, of course, that you're going to interact with, they're going to have a lot of dialogue, and they're going to have a lot of options that control how karma adjustments work and how different dialogue triggers based on different aspects of the game. So being able to fold those procedures down and make it easier to scroll through something that's got 3,000–4,000 lines of code, that's going to be really, really handy. So you'll want to make sure that you're paying attention to how to do that safely so that you don't accidentally change something. You never want to change an SSL. You always want to use the SSL to change the .message file. And with the .message file, we also want to make sure that we're posting the PA or Project Arroyo suffix at the end of it. So usually I put space, open parentheses, PA, close parentheses. And we'll talk about that again a little bit later. Just planting the seed for now. So talk pproc is usually the origin of all dialogue for NPCs. The project standardizes these procs within the node structure, and we'll look at the node structure in just a little bit, by putting all procs containing dialogue or quest relevant code into node 000. So if we have destroy pproc, talk pproc, examine pproc, description pproc, any of those, they will go inside node 000. Then I will also sort them in alphabetical order, just to make my life a little bit easier. Also make sure to note the return type of the method or proc. You know, return type basically says at the end of this method, I'm going to hand you back something. Unless, of course, it's a void. Most methods that we see in Fallout 2 are voids. They perform an action, they terminate, and there is no returned object or value. Okay? An int, for example, would return an integer value. A float would return a decimal value. You know, a string would return, you know, characters of text, that sort of thing. Some nodes of interest to be aware of. Node 998, this is always going to initiate combat. Node 999 is always a termination point. Timed event pproc, usually tied to some event that's contingent on a specific time of day or a time limit. For example, you know, Joey, you can't really deal with him unless it's between the hours of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. If you're talking to him at nighttime, he's just trying to find somewhere to sleep, so he's going to ignore you. Now, there are a few procs that you can likely ignore unless they're directly referenced. Map enter pproc, map exit pproc, use skill on pproc, all of those things are not necessarily going to matter. Quick little note about node 998, by the way. In Fallout 4, we have the ability to have somebody forgive you if you pull a weapon on them or if you attack them, and then if you try and, you know, cower down or whatever else. I believe you have the ability to kind of drop aggro at that point. I don't know how we're going to implement that, but if you see a character for which that might be a good idea, you may want to go ahead and put that in your notes. Don't construct anything elaborate, just kind of put it in there as, hey, this might be a good idea, because anything that makes the world feel more organic and alive is really good. If everybody gets pissed at you for the slightest mistake and it's irreparable, you know, it sits, you know, you accidentally clip Sulik with a shot and all of a sudden, you know, he's your hated enemy while you're in a firefight, not a good thing. So let's make sure we avoid that, okay? Okay, Neanderthal dialogue. This is something I get a lot of questions about simply because there's not a lot of consistency in the implementation. There's a couple of different ways we can trigger this. Low intelligence dialogue is one of the best things about Fallout 2. Fallout franchise in general is whenever you have low intelligence dialogue, and you'll see this in like New Vegas and things. If you have an intelligence below 4, which means 1, 2, or 3, then there are special dialogue options that you will get. So for example, GIQ option allows us to have a couple of parameters, and the first one is the IQ value to be compared. And it doesn't just have to be low intelligence. These options are still going to play the same way if we have an intelligence quotient above a certain skill level as well. So I don't know what's considered to be a medium or a high check, but I know that the low check is below 4. As I said with GIQ, the first parameter passed in is the IQ value to be compared. If we have it in an if statement, we will have, if open parenthesis player or dude object check, and then we can have intelligence, which I believe is stat 4, because we have to start with 0. So strength is 0, perception is 1. Going down the ECI, I would normally be the 5th letter, so we count that one back to 4. And then, of course, we have the difference between less than 4 or less than or equal to 3. This is basically dealing with something similar to like an out-of-bounds array check. The idea is these comparisons are specifically asking, 3 is less than 4, but does not include 4. If we had an equal sign, then it would be 4 or less. We have to make sure that we're paying attention to the statement being made. With bad option, good option, and neutral option, which are the 3 primary methods of delivering a response emotionally. Remember that we have emotionally charged responses in Fallout 4 that we can give that are, mad or neutral or happy. We can tie those in. The third parameter here, which I've screenshotted below, is the IQ test. So we can have a message number, the target, and then with the IQ test to make sure that we can carry it out. Something to be aware of with low intelligence dialogue is that it's not always going to pop up because it's a conditional. If you have intelligence below a certain value, that may be in conjunction with you have to be at a certain point in a quest, or you have to have a particular item in your possession to be able to trigger. Certain people, like Sulik is one of the few companions that you can actually recruit with low intelligence. But even then, you can't tell him to put his weapon away or something like that. So there are going to be some limitations with that, and we have to make sure that we know how those play correctly. And part of that is being able to correctly pull from the SSL file where the low intelligence dialogue actually is and what's being said and what's being done. Some other common terms, references to dude or the dude refer to the player. And I talked about that just a little bit ago. Teensy bit misogynist, but again, we can't make a moral obloquy out of everything. So if you see dude or the dude, it's just referring to the player. Obviously, Fallout 4 plays a little bit differently. We have a fully fleshed out, male and female storyline, so no worries there. Unfortunately, we don't address non-binary persons, which, again, inclusion is great, but there's only so much that we can do as storytellers, unfortunately. To identify when a player has spoken to an NPC, there are often 2 variables that we use, either here before or node underscore and then a number. When we see node underscore and the number, the number that is there is the node number in which this happens. So let's say that, node 29 is where we are. At the beginning, node 29 will be 0 because it doesn't really exist. So, node 29 will have to be declared in the declaration block of the character, and then it will be accessed when node 29 is reached. Node 29 will have an initial value of 0, meaning that it hasn't been used. And then after a particular condition has been met, it will go ahead and set it. In some cases, it'll set it as soon as you enter the node before you start having any conversation. This is not a great idea, so we need to look at the conditional that's operating, because turning that node on before the test means that it's always going to be turned on. So we have to make sure, is there a piece of dialogue that's not being reached because the trigger is happening too early? you have to think about the logical sequence in which these things are going to occur. You know, that's why when we pay attention in programming to if, then, else, excuse me, we have to identify what happens where. We have the test, we have the decision, and then we have the update. Okay. Here before is basically the same thing. It's just going to be more of a global version instead of a node-specific version. So here before affects the character, you know, whether or not you've met a particular character, and then the node is just specifically for a particular node of dialogue. Bad option, good option, and neutral option are three different ways to impose emotional connotation to a dialogue choice. With reply, this is a type of dialogue that is attached to the NPC. This is usually when you hit A to talk to somebody in Fallout, you know, they give you that initial, what do you want? Or, hey, good to see you again, that sort of thing. That's a reply. There are also reaction adjustments that can be called here. I don't know how we're going to implement those just yet, but they can be minor, moderate, or severe adjustments of reaction, very much like in Fallout 4 with the, you know, somebody liked that, somebody loved that, somebody hated it, somebody disliked that sort of thing. Folding. I brought it up just a little bit ago. This is just compressing and expanding method blocks to make the document more readable. Now, I don't have an option to do that in SFOL at present. I may just be missing it. So if you come across it, please let me know, because I always want to incorporate what I can for keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts are life for working in IT and for working in programming and all that stuff. It's just so much faster, and it's easier to script. In Notepad++, however, we do have some shortcuts. We've got Alt-0 and Alt-Shift-0, which will fold and unfold everything. Now, again, these are going to do it to all options. So that means that if you're just trying to fold one certain thing, you're better to use your mouse at that point. Some other odd stuff we may see in the SSL. You may see a reply line that looks like this. Starts with reply like normal, and then it's 100 plus here before, or 100 plus, you know, dude male or dude female. Or if there's a particular skill check, or node 17. With these, it's important to determine what's going to trigger these variables. So with the node 17 one, a node variable can go from 0 to 5 or 10 or even higher. So every time you trigger that node 26 increment, wherever that may happen to be, then the dialog listing is going to change. So you may see something that says, you know, reply 200 plus node 17, or 300 plus node 17 is the example I give you here, and it's 10 different options. So, you know, node 17 starts out at 0 and works its way up to 9 somehow. And it may well be that it's going to cause, you know, escalating tension, or it may cause, you know, dialogue checks that you have to pass, or certain things like that. With dude as female, again, we just create two branches. So if you see dude as female and then else, or dude as male and then else, that's just saying, you know, male or female. We're going to have a branch depending on dialogue. And it's usually just saying, you know, somebody says man or dude or lady or chick or honey or whatever they want to say to, you know, some kind of diminutive that they're trying to incorporate. Logical operators. As I threatened in one of my videos before, I could definitely spend a lot of time talking about logical operators, because there's some really creative usage that we see across, you know, not only the span of programming, but particularly the Fallout series, in order to try and optimize code. So the three big logical operators we deal with are and, or, and not. And is a conjunction, meaning that all parts of an and statement must be true for the statement to be true. Or is a disjunction. This is the inverse of an and. One part must be true for the statement to be true. That's not to say that if both pieces are true, it'll be ignored. It just means the first time you get to a yes or a true with an or, you can go ahead and drop out of it. You can short circuit and say, okay, we've got our or, it's true, we're going to go to the true branch. Something we want to pay attention to in programming is being able to make reductive decisions. Getting to yes or no when it allows us to eliminate a chunk of dialogue or questioning is important, because it optimizes how well the code flows. The example I often give to my students is, let's say you're taking a survey for, a burger joint. You go to McDonald's or Wendy's or Burger King and they give you a survey. You go on and you answer a couple questions and it's like 1%, 3%, 5%, 7%. Then all of a sudden it jumps up to like 39%. What happened? Well, apparently one of the questions that you answered precluded a number of answers that would be relevant to something they're trying to find out. Maybe there's a particular topic or product that they're trying to sell and you didn't happen to purchase it. So they have a bunch of questions about it, and rather than annoying you by making you answer the same question of didn't get it, no, 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 whatever it is, they want to get to the next relevant question. So and or, it's really important to be able to use the right one. Not basically just negates the term. So if an and would normally give us a true answer, not and or nand would give us a false. If an or answer would give us a true, then nor would give us a false in that instance. Two other ones. These are a little bit weird. These are called bitwise operators, bitwise and bitwise or. So again, we're doing conjunction and disjunction, but we're doing it from one bit at a time. So if we were to test the digits of two binary strings using bitwise, we're going to do each one individually. So it's 4 separate operations for a 4-bit string. If it was 8-bit string, it would have 8 different operations. So you see 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1. Those are our 2 strings. So let's compare the first ones. 0 and 0 is 0. 1 and 0 is 0. 0 and 1, 0. 1 and 1, however, that's going to give us 1. So that means that we're saying what would normally be, let's see, that's 5 and 3. So 5 and 3 is 8. Instead, with a bitwise and, we're getting 1. So there are reasons why we would compare these and involve them, but just be aware that if you see bitwise and, that's what it's talking about. Trying to remember who in particular I saw that for. I think it might be either Metzger or somebody else somebody who hangs out at Mom's a lot. I can't remember who it was exactly. But in any event, I'll try and find a screenshot and include it if I do a revision to this video. Bitwise or is the same thing, but we're just using or instead of and. So 0 or 0 is 0, right? 1 or 0, 0, 1, and 1 or 1 gives us 0, 1, 1, 1. So instead here, where we're comparing 5 and 3 with an or, in this case, we're going to get 7, which is going to be 4, 2, and 1, which is the binary representation that we would have there. Okay, so it's a little weird, not something you're going to see a whole lot of, but I wanted to include a statement on it so that way people can figure out. Again, 25-year-old source code. We got to make sure we're dealing with this in the proper way, being able to interpret these little spaghetti strands to figure out what's being done. So we've talked a lot about the different parts. Let's get down to the process of what we're actually doing. First things first, we're going to open up the script in SFOL. So in this case, I've got DC SMIDI opened up. And then if we're starting from an INT, which I hope you don't have to do, we're going to go ahead and decompile the script. Pay attention to where you're saving it so that way you know where to retrieve it when you're uploading it. Then we're going to go to Notepad++ and select the matching message file. I have actually updated mine so that way it recognizes the .msg extension as part of the C++ family. You don't have to do that. I don't recommend that you do unless you know what you're doing. I'm trying to incorporate some things into the XML document for the markup, and if I find something that's helpful, again, I'll give you guys an update. So let's look at some basic interpretation of the dialogue. The first line is going to give us a hash. So this is line 7. There's some descriptive stuff that's going to be up top that we don't get to go to just yet. Followed by a 1. So the 1 indicates the node that we're dealing with. This is the group of dialogue belonging to node 1 in this case. Also in the parenthesis here, we see the abbreviation WTG. It just means where to go. That's usually an origin point for dialogue. Line 8 is a line of dialogue. So this is actually where it's getting talked about. So line 200, you varmint, get out of here before I have to learn you. Curly braces is a delimiter for the Watcom parser, meaning that it knows to separate based on text that is separated by an open and closed curly brace. We use curly braces in Java. We use curly braces in C#. Curly braces are used all over the place. And then again, you can see the structure here is listed. Line number, not sure what the middle one is. It may just be a space. And then we have dialogue text on the opposite side. Also critical are comments. Text here is ignored by the compiler. So if we block something out using either a line comment or a block comment, these things will be there as notes for the programming team rather than something that gets executed as code. We talk about syntax versus semantics in programming. Syntax is the code. That's what's actually written. Semantics is what it means, okay? So these things come in, as I said, two flavors. Line comments are just used for a single line, and they start with a double slash. Block comments start with a slash asterisk and end with an asterisk slash. You can see how they kind of bookend each other. Everything between those markers is then commented. And they use the asterisk because that is a wild card. For those of you who don't know, that is the meaning of 42 in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In ASCII, the character 42 is an asterisk or a wild card, meaning it can be anything you want it to be. How philosophical and wonderful from the late, great Douglas Adams. What's in a name? Let's look at some style framework here, trying to figure out how we put these things together, how we can decipher a little bit about where something belongs based on its name. There are 8 characters in a name, shorter if there are fewer characters total. Character 1 is the location code, character 2 is the type code, and then 3 through 8 are for the name. .ssl is your script, .msg is for dialogue. So for example, ncghoul.ssl from Fallout 1 would be the necropolis, so that's the N. Type critter, that's the C, and then name ghoul. So if it were instead, Yaogwai, if we had that from Fallout 4 or from Fallout 3, YAO, then we would have GUA. So it'd be Yaogwa, because we wouldn't have that I on the end, because it's limited to 8 characters. That's why you see some that have kind of weird abbreviations. So let's look at our different location codes. We've got basically pretty much A through I. We don't have one for J. And then we have K, M, N, O, Q, R, S, V, W, Z. Z is just generic. E is either the military base or random encounter. I don't know why they don't have those separated, but that's just kind of how that is. And you can see how the other ones are lined up. So like Vault 15, B is supposed to be the buried vault. That's what I read from the original text, which I thought was kind of weird. But again, what are you going to do? And then type codes, of course, we have critter, talking head, items, party functions, scenery, spatials, and even a type code for walls, things that separate. And it's a little bit different in a top-down isometric, like we have the 2.5D. So just be aware that, wall codes are not something we're likely going to have to worry about too much in Fallout 4. So those scripts are probably going to stay where they are. They're not going to be imported a whole lot. Excuse me. And then now let's get into Notepad++, where we're dealing with the dialogue file. So I talked a little bit earlier about the UDL, or user-defined language. This is an XML document that automatically color codes the MSG files to make them easier to read. Once we import it, it highlights keywords, it makes sure that folding methods are going to work a little bit easier. It makes it visually more consistent, which for the CK editors is going to be a huge benefit. So let's try and make sure we're sticking to that wherever possible. If you don't want to import the UDL, you don't have to, but I would seriously appreciate following the style guide that I'm going to give you. Got a couple of helpful commands for you. Control F is to find, Control H is to replace. Usually when I first go in, I will use find and replace to replace the hash that we see at the beginning of the node indicators, and I literally replace it with #def, which is my define keyword, space NODE, all capitals, 00. And I'll do that for the first 9 nodes, which usually covers the majority of what's there. If I need to from that point, I will then go ahead and switch it over to a single 0 instead of a double, and then hit replace all, so that way it will go ahead and give me that appendation. And it'll make it a little bit easier for me. I will have to go in and manually insert the #end at the end of the method in order to allow proper folding. Now, speaking of folding, as I indicated a little bit earlier, Alt-0 and Alt-Shift-0 will allow us to fold and unfold all of the contents. If you have defs but you don't have ends bracketed correctly, they will not assemble. So if you look back at previous characters that I've worked on, so like Flick, Frankie, Mom, Joey, all in the den, by the way, that will that'll give you an idea of what it looks like to put that kind of stuff together. When you're saving a modified version of an MSG file, make sure to append the PA suffix. So what I usually do when I first open up the .message file is save a copy. Go ahead and save the .pa or the space PA version, so that way I'm not overwriting the original if I ever have to refer back to it. So how do we set up random and float dialog? This is something that we deal with in Fallout 2 a lot, and it's occasionally used in Fallout 4, which is just kind of the random ambient. So they'll be standing there talking based on proximity. And there are some things that'll come up randomly, just a random tree. So we're going to treat random dialog like an if-then block. I went ahead and set up the XML document to have random be an acceptable keyword, so it'll light it up in that kind of teal color. In this case on the right, we'll see that there are 8 lines from 2300 to 2307. I used to comment out the declaration line where it actually said random. I don't do that anymore. I just leave random as the keyword. And then an end keyword allows us to make sure that we can separate random dialogue from non-random content. I may add folding to that later. I haven't decided. I'm trying not to get too crazy with the XML, so that way a document just starts getting messy again. It's strange how that happens. You know, you go from a point of, oh, we're more organized, everything's more streamlined, to where, no, now it looks like messy crap, so let's not do that. So, fine line we got to tread. And if any of you guys are good working with XML or working with Notepad++, please, 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 please send me your suggestions. Please send me things that you feel would work, because I want this project to be, you know, just super slick. I want us to be able to automate things where we can. I want us to be able to put stuff together and make this as fast as we can, so we can move on to the next stages of dialogue editing as need be, or move into other sections. You know, I really want Arroyo to be finished as quickly and as smoothly as possible. So that means that everybody has to really push to make the most of their time. So when we're setting up a node, I recommend that you set it up similarly to this. There is something that I have debated doing, which is essentially creating a blank node template that I will just copy and paste however many times I need based on however many nodes I know the system is going to have, and then go in and fill them in. I haven't tested that yet. I am still in the process of trying to write, you know, Python or Java scripts to be able to automatically reformat based on the XML structure that we're already using. Current attempts have not gone well. So if you think you might have a suggestion, I am always willing to hear it. So let's throw it together based on def and end. So we see in the top left and bottom left pound def and pound end. What these do for the purposes of folding, identify the beginning and the end of the method so that we can collapse it if we need to. Node pound pound pound, this is going to be the 3-digit node number. I have not run into any dialog that has more than 99 nodes. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't nodes that don't use 3 digits. There are some that actually use 4. So it's important to understand that, like, the node number here, this is just for convenience. If it needs to expand, it can. So, like, I think there's one that's like node 1000 for Sulik, which is party member options. It's kind of a standalone deal. Traditionally, they stop at 999, which is going to be our goodbye node. We talked about that a little bit earlier. After the node declaration, I go ahead and put in a dash and then usually put in a description about what this particular node is about. Helps me identify where in the creation kit we call them phases, where those are going to happen. So we've got our line number 001, we've got our empty bracket in the middle, and we've got MPC dialog on the right. I'll go ahead and move down a line, tab in. The tab indentions in PowerPoint are a little bit more rigorous than I would like, but it does a good job of visually delineating how this works. Responses, which I usually put in all caps. It will go ahead and bold it, turn it blue, and put it in italics, I believe, to, again, visual separation. Target equals n and then 3 numbers. So whatever node is supposed to be triggered when we go there. When you're looking at a message or a say option, it will have the line of dialogue and it will have the target node that it's supposed to follow. So this means that if we say line 2, whatever the PC dialog is, it will then send us to whatever node it was targeted to. The target equals is a keyword, and it operates in prefix mode, meaning that anything after it until you go down to the next line is going to be, right now I believe it's kind of a nice Kelly green. So just make sure that you, cut off your node afterwards and then start your dialogue. Otherwise your dialogue is going to be green if it's all on the same line. I also included a conditional. So if we have here if MPC hostile, which is just some generic pseudocode variables, we can understand what the response would be. So target equals N998, line 3, I'll crush you. So basically this is the player picking a fight with the NPC. And then we have end to show that the if block has ended. Of course you have if, else if, or just else, which is the last option before you get to end. And then N999, which is always our termination. Line 4, goodbye. So there are going to be a number of circumstances in which your dialogue may fall into a couple of different categories. This is also just a list of responses that are possible. In the case of this one here that says if NPC hostile, if for whatever reason that if is not met, meaning the NPC is not currently hostile, you actually can't trigger it. It won't show up in the dialogue. So think of it as, things get added to the list. You tick things off. It's like, okay, we've got eggs, we've got milk, we've got bread, we've got vegetable oil. Oh wait, we don't have eggs. Scratch that. So you take it off the list. That's the way I want you to think about it, is that these options are what is possible, but they must have their criteria met to be able to show up in the dialogue lists. Now, when we're transcribing and annotating, it's important to sort all nodes numerically to make them easier to find. With any non-node method, so just standard procedures like talk pproc or whatever else, insert them inside node 000, the originator node. It just makes it easier to keep them all in one place, and then I sort them alphabetically. Subnodes like node 007A should be indented into their primary node. So node 007 would be the home site for 007A, kind of like we do with procs inside of node 000. Notepad is also self-referential, meaning that once an entry exists in the document, Notepad puts it into autocomplete. So if you have a name that's long or if it's awkwardly spelled, you start typing it, it should show up as an autocomplete option. This can be really annoying when you're first getting started, because if something is spelled wrong, you have to spell it correctly first for Notepad to know what you're doing. It doesn't have a spell check in and of itself, but once you start putting in the correct entries or correct spellings or correct punctuation, just apostrophes and stuff, those updated objects will be available to you. Now, please note that the autocomplete section is not applicable to all open documents. It only affects the document being edited. So if you have something, in a document, like a single .message file, it's not going to carry over to another one, even if you have 2 tabs open at once. All right, so let's get into FreePlane, our mind mapping software. FreePlane is a really awesome open source mapping software that we use. Number one, it's free. There was one called FreeMind that came before it. This is the updated version, and it's still being maintained. It allows us to visualize dialogue and all kinds of other stuff before implementing it into the CK. And I've taken a couple of steps to try and make it a bit cleaner, visually, so that we can have some items to identify what things are a bit more quickly. So, like most Windows software, FreePlane has some familiar shortcuts. Save, new, open, select all control shortcuts. Copy, cut, and paste. If you've done it in Word, you can do it in FreePlane. Insert gives you a new node, which is called a child node. So that means that if we have a node on the left, in the way that we do it anyway, that would be considered the parent node. So we have the original root node, we hit insert, a new node appears to the right. We hit insert again, the next one to the right will pop up. I'll show you in just a minute graphically. If we hit enter, while we have a node selected, we have a new node at the same depth level or same hierarchy level called a sibling. Delete, I hope you know what delete does. Alt home folds everything, and Alt end unfolds everything. So these nodes are capable of being folded. What I would recommend is that if you have nodes that are accidentally closing or things like that, and we'll get to that in a minute in the setup, I would hit Control A to select everything, and then Alt End to unfold. And then you can right click and set those nodes to always be unfolded. You don't have to do that every time you add a node because that would get exhausting, but every couple of, if you get through a couple of chunks of code, it may be something good just to make your life a little simpler. Now for some slightly more advanced controls. These are the intermediates. Alt-Shift-C for copy and V, as in Victor, for paste. So copy and paste the way that we see it before. We're just adding Alt-Shift instead of Control. Okay. Control F11 allows you to edit styles. So it will actually pop up a little window that shows you examples of what these styles will look like. Shift-Insert is a new parent node. Shift-Enter is a new previous sibling node. It gets really messy when you do this, but generally I don't tend to use that. The reason I point it out, though, is because I do use Shift-Enter while editing text. So when I'm setting up a node, for instance, I like to include the description, or at least an abbreviated version of the description. So I will type the node 001, Shift-Enter, and then I'll put in // to indicate that it's a comment, and then put in initial greeting node or talk node or something similar. Alt-Shift-Insert, this is a big one, guys, the summary node. This lets us take multiple nodes and tie them back to a central point when we need to. So let's say that we have 3 pieces of dialogue and all of them go to a particular node next. So we meet somebody, we talk to them, we get to a point, and no matter what we say, we're going to move to a particular node next. Let's say that it's just node 5, whatever else. We're in node 4 right now. So node 4, they have their reply, we have our responses, and we can have 5 or 6 different responses, and they all go back to node 5. So that summary node is going to allow you to represent that visually very easily. Another one that we want to look at is the initial setup and preferences for free playing. So I recommend turning off collapse on click or fold on click inside. That one tends to be kind of annoying. Like if I click on something and I've already typed in it, I don't want it to collapse. I clicked on it because I probably want to hit F2 and start editing it, or double click it to start editing the text. If you skip this, it will make your navigation slightly more difficult, so just bear in mind that will speed the plow for you a bit. I tried to go ahead and highlight where it is, so if you go into Preferences, go to the Behavior tab, and go to Fold on Click Inside and uncheck that box, it will make your life a lot simpler. Did for me. Be aware that as you move over nodes with the mouse, hovering could lead to what's called a soft select of that node. So make sure before you press delete or copy or paste or whatever else that you know what node you have selected. Just be aware of your surroundings. Now, the textual node structure that we created in Notepad++, meaning that we have the node definitions, we know what the lines are, we know what nodes all of our replies are going to, we have factored in all of our if then else conditionals. Now we can convert them to graphic nodes really fast. The root node is the name of your script, and then as I said, you hit insert, you go ahead and create your node, and then you can create the dialogue that's attached to it. Now, to take advantage of the automatic formatting that's already been produced and implemented, I would recommend that you download an existing dialogue map from Trello. So somebody like Flick would probably be good. He's one I've worked on really recently. Make sure you're grabbing the mind map, the .mm file, not the PDF. If for any reason that is not attached, it should be. But if it's not, just message me and I will DM you that file. Once it's imported, the styles are going to be defined as follows. Level 1 is the node. So basically, if you have the word node in all caps, and it will check for the case, it will format it as a node, so it'll give you kind of that light yellow background with bold black text as the primary. Level 2, which is the red background, is NPC dialogue. There's no current trigger for this, so I usually just right click it and go to style 2 or level 2. PC dialogue looks for the dash arrow that I've got here, so the dash greater than symbol, which is what I use to determine a line going to a target node. So that's how that shows up, and it works pretty well. The if then else conditionals, it triggers currently for if or else if with an open parenthesis. So that way I can have that put together. It'll automatically put it at level 4, which means it's plain white background. It doesn't have a border. Level 5, the black background with the green text, very Fallouty, is the debug statements. I don't run into these a lot, but I did want to make them stand out. So level 5 and level 8, I use the black background. It's the only time I incorporate those. Level 6 is a method or node call. So this is a direct trigger to call node 006 or call node 001, whatever it happens to be. 7 is currently unused. I haven't added level 7 yet. Good to have just in case I run into something where I need an extra node. I'm sure I could rearrange if need be. Unused dialog comes up with number 8. You can see it has the little no symbol there. That's the black background with the white text. If I put in the word unused, again, all caps in the node's text, it should automatically format it. Node 999 is our dialog terminator. So if I put N999, meaning that if I have line 413 dash greater than space N999, it will automatically give me what I need for that. 998, combat dialog, that's going to trigger for content 998, meaning that if I trigger something to go to the 998 node, which we know is our combat node, it will automatically put the little bomb there. Again, I wanted to make sure that I left it pretty normal in terms of the content of the node itself being easy to read. So 9, 10, and 11 are the same thing as PC dialog at level 3. Level 11, int less than 4 dialog or Neanderthal dialog. So currently it triggers if you have int less than 4 in the statement. So if it's if player intelligence less than 4, that's going to automatically flag and put kind of the disconcerted looking face there. Sometimes nodes get out of alignment, so we got to fix that, and we can do that with reset and with sort. To reset a node to where it would be when we first created it, we'll use Control R for reset node position. So if you accidentally drag a node completely out of alignment, click on it, hit Control R, it'll reset everything to where it should be. I have done this by hitting Control A and then Control R. If you have things positioned a certain way, if you want to line things up a little bit differently, make it a little bit easier to read, then you may certainly do so. But just be aware that reset node will make that go away. You can also do sorting of the content of the nodes that you're working with. You can do it on individual branches or you can do it on everything. If you do sort children, be aware that it will sort things alphabetically. So if you have if statements or anything like that, sort children can mess things up really quickly. So just be careful about that. If you want to sort nodes individually, you can click on one of the nodes that you want to move, hold Control, and then press your up or down arrows to shift it up or down among its siblings, so that way it can move up or down, make sure that it stays in the correct position. Now this is one that I started doing, I'm trying to remember. It was after Sulik. I actually had to go back and redo it for Sulik because it made my life a lot simpler. When you're working in the MSG file, it's important to pay attention to the targets declared in the responses section. Whenever we have a node that has a single trigger point, it is considered non-ambiguous, meaning that it only comes from that place, which means that we can consider it an extension of the node from which it originates. We can chain these together and we can reduce vertical space on the map. That means that we can expand it horizontally instead, because most people have widescreen monitors that are wider across top and bottom rather than across the left and right. That works a little bit better, plays more with the widescreen stuff. As we see here in the graphic below, node 4 leads to node 5. That is the only place that node 5 can come from. Node 5 can tie back into node 6, as can 2 of the origin points coming off of node 4. So the only place you can get to node 6 is from node 4 or node 5. Node 5 can only come from node 4, so we can use that nice summary node to tie node 6 together. This allows us to go ahead and chain them together and streamline the flow of dialogue. Now, something I have thought about doing but have not done yet is to remove, for example, the N006 from lines 271, 253, and 254, and just leave the arrows attached and then go straight to node 006. Or in the case of where it calls a node and that node call is going to a non-ambiguous node, just removing that as well. I haven't done so because it's not really going to save me that much space. I want to try and make sure that we're not losing detail by trying to be more streamlined and efficient. Conversely, as we see here, node 4 has to start from the root, meaning that it is not non-ambiguous. It is going to have potential multiple access points. Same thing here with node 13. I may have trimmed it down to where you can't see node 13, but it's down below a little bit. Node 7 will be another example. They are starting from the root because there are multiple places where node 4, node 7 might be accessed. So that's going to preclude the non-ambiguity that we would need. And then, of course, we have the final upload. Once you've gotten everything together, you've taken your SSL and your MSG, gotten everything all annotated and pretty, and then taken that MSG file, converted it into a mind map, built it up into a nice graphical representation. We're going to do a couple of things. So go ahead and save your message file. Make sure it has that suffix, please. Take your mind map file. Go ahead and save that. Make sure you save the .mm file. And then you're also going to go to export. So you're going to go to File, Export to, and you're going to select mind map. PDF rather, excuse me. There's a couple of different formats that you can do it to, like ASCII doc and HTML and all that stuff. I don't really like those. I feel like PDF really is easy. PDF stands for Portable Document Format, and I like how it works. And it's got cross-platform compatibility with pretty much everybody. So if you have a Android phone, Windows phone, BlackBerry, Apple phone, laptop, desktop, doesn't really matter. You should be able to read PDFs in some capacity. So that'll make your life a little bit simpler. And my life too. Thank you. And as a as a lead editor, you know, that tends to you know, anything that makes my life easier hopefully makes the project go smoother, right? Not to sound arrogant in any capacity. I really love working on this project. It's a lot of fun. This, because it is very repetitive, kind of just, it appeals to my nature. You know, I'm very much a repetitive task kind of guy. So hopefully this is something that you find interesting, helps you to understand how the characters work, what the world is like, and how we can make sure that we're keeping that authentic Fallout 2 experience in a much more visually impressive engine. You know, the stuff that I've seen people doing, and you know, the rifle that's made out of, you know, pipe parts that has a spoon as a sight. I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. So it's really cool to feel like I'm contributing in a meaningful way to that. So if there's something you've run across that you feel that I could do more efficiently or effectively, something that is confusing you or was poorly explained, please, please, please message me. You know, DM me as soon as you have any questions or concerns. I am always open to constructive criticism. Excuse me. Because when I do better, we do better. And when we do better, this project kicks ass even harder. And I know we can do some really incredible stuff based on what I've seen so far. So, guys, I want to thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you so much for whatever vote of confidence Austin has placed in me by making me a lead. It's really cool. I'm glad to be a part of it. And I hope that we are able to enjoy one another's company, at least in a virtual environment, for many, many years to come. Thank you again, and good night.